I'm thinking about the phenomenon of people posting really heinous things on social media under their own names. And it just seems like they don't have anybody. It just strikes me as tremendously lonely because they're trying to get attention, and seemingly they've internalized the only way that they can get attention is by misbehaving. Any love is good love, so to speak. And I think, one, how do I never become that? And I think that the answer is just understanding that it is incredibly important to your life and your mind to have people in your life that you can actually speak to candidly, openly, intimately with, that, they're not going to be using it against you in some way. They're not going to instrumentalize or triangulate or plot about how to throw this in your face at some later time. And I think that there is danger in getting really mean with these people, like denouncing them as some kind of primary evil. Ultimately words are just words, and I'll maintain that freedom of speech is precisely for all the things that you don't want to hear. But I think that the question under the question with them is, and the denouncement is that I think that we all realize that we're a lot closer to those folks because we're all made of the same stuff, and you can always see there's a way in which if your life took a few sharp turns that could be you in that position. And so maybe it's not that we have a moral crusade against them. It's more of a distancing move. It's more of a fearful move. And when I think about having empathy for those people, I think it can't be based on fear and displacement and sort of peddling away from them as a way to distance, to think that we're not like them. I mean, if anything, the only healing really takes place the more that we realize that we're like them, and let them know that it doesn't have to be this way. And that is, I mean, life is I've had it said to me as sort of living questions. For my own mind, I think it's a matter of paradox, because you've always have to hold this tension between understanding that people deserve grace and empathy, but you may reach a point where they just need to be cut off just to preserve your own sanity and your own life. And it's a tricky paradox to hold. I mean, there's a lot of paradoxes like that. I mean, I think that, anything worth having is a paradox. Anything worth doing is a paradox. I mean, speaking of a couple shows back, talking about Jung, talking about how God is a contradiction himself, that makes sense to me. So, in thinking about friends, I mean, it's always, starting at the very beginning, I think a lot of your friends are just people that you happen to be around. They're just, you just sort of occupy spaces with them. And there's something odd about the ones that stick in my memory the most are always those kids that were in your school for like a week. And I've had the oddest experiences with people like that. I mean, there's individuals, there's like, it doesn't really matter, but it's just, they sink in there for some reason. Maybe it's just because when you're a kid, you can't really handle transience that well. So they just sort of lodge in there for some reason. And as you mature, I mean, I think the first friend that I had that I would call a best friend was, I remember there's this very classic thing when you have friends as children where it's three of you. And there's always the third man is always the one that gets picked on, is always the one that is made fun of, is sort of made the butt of every joke, is sort of like the jester for everyone's entertainment. And so it was in one of these trios, and then I remember I finally had enough and I peeled off, and then the leader sort of turned on this guy too, and then he finds me. I think one day he walked to my house before I walked to school and just walked with me. And, even in the 6th grade, I knew that, well, something happened there that was significant. And we were indeed best friends. And the one thing that I realized about best friends was that there's a lot of times of silence. Like I grew up in Medicine Hat, so we have all of these, I don't know what you'd call them. They're like dunes. It's like a desert. There's cactuses everywhere, cacti. And we just spent so much time just walking along, saying nothing. And we'd have conversations, but they were Spartan, but they were significant. And if you want to talk about memory, I mean, I remember that, I was friends with them for 6 months and I moved away. But I remember for years after, I would have dreams about not him, but his house. So it's kind of this popular thing now about liminal spaces. Well, he lived in these sort of, they call them chicken coops, like these 2-story bungalow kind of things, and like townhouses. And I would just every so often have these dreams about just endless townhouse courtyards and complexes that would stretch for hundreds of kilometers. I never quite understood it. And, they'd always take place in houses that were kind of like his, but not his. And he was present, but not really present. And I don't know necessarily why it lodged in my brain, because I hadn't really made a lot of friends after moving. And there's just something about open loops. And I think about, friendships are generally pretty hollow. Like a lot of friendships are very, very hollow and kind of the moment. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's people that you're around, it's people that you see every day, but maybe there's nothing really bonding it. And maybe there's something about finding people spontaneously that causes true friendships to happen. And so I think I got close in high school, I think, a few times. I mean, I spoke earlier about how I would have conversations with people about like what keeps you up at night and like what are you doing and what is it all here for? And I never really got an answer. And I didn't really find another friend until about 20. And, I remember there was this moment. So I'd left home and I was working in a pretty toxic place. And there was this night where it was, I'd say around -40 with a wind chill. And so I was working third shift, and prior to COVID, all the grocery stores would actually stay open until 11 p.m. And I remember there was a cashier at the Safeway, and he looked and sounded like Sidney Pollack. He played the Doctor in Eyes Wide Shut. He was in a lot of other things, but just to give you an idea, like the voice and the erudition, and there was something about the intelligence behind his eyes that, I think about him way more often than I should, just the way that he would speak. Like, you're just very like, would you care to have your meat wrapped in a separate bag? Very good. Have a good night. Excellent. Like, he just, something, I have no idea how he ended up there, because if you asked me without the apron on him, I would say clearly he's a physician or a lawyer or something. And so I walk out in the parking lot, and it may as well have been the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And there's this, Le Pelle de Vide, I think is how you pronounce it, where you're, when you kind of lean over a railing and you think, what if? But there was just something about that moment where I was just like, if I stop walking, it's 11:05. Parking lot's empty. The world is empty, basically. If I just stop walking, that's it. And not that I wanted to. It was more that I sat with the thought of it for a second, just that it was even possible. And that moment was probably the loneliest moment I've ever thought. Like, really middle of the Pacific Ocean. Like, that's it. And around this time in my life, that's when, I met somebody that, the longtime listeners will know who I'm talking about. And she was a best friend. And, I hear people talk a lot about, or at least one person talks about siblings, and how they would say that it's a very important relationship because it's the only witness you have for yourself as a child. And I didn't figure out what was supposedly important about that. But when I think about her, I mean, having sort of cut everyone off in my life and it was just me, and I met her and I could speak to her at the depth, and, you know, I could finally feel that, that connection that I hadn't. She was the only stable witness of me at that time. And when we think of these ideas of, say, open loops, where I think that I remember her so acutely because, you know, the names changed to protect the innocent. I won't give the full story, but there was, there's no possibility to talk to her again and to ask her about myself at that time. And then I think about, you know, the very good friends that I have now. I realize that they are what keeps me. They are sort of guardrails around what I become. And it's very important because if you don't have anyone that you can trust almost as much as yourself to hold you to account, I mean, I think that would be the definition of loneliness, truly, when you think that, you know, you're the greatest consciousness in the universe. And we can take that in a narcissistic sense, but I mean, I think that I'll rely on you to just know what I'm feeling here. Like this idea that there really is, maybe that you don't have the best take or the best view of the world, but merely that it's something that's entirely unique to you and no one could possibly understand it. And so I think we would define loneliness as that which is the world without a stable witness and without someone that actually understands you deeply and can function as sort of a consciousness outside your own to deliberate with. You know, it's this lamp into all of your blind spots. And I think that if I don't have those people, that's when I feel completely alone. And, you know, going further to that, you would think, you know, I mean, I often hear it about how everyone forgets that, you know, your life has a second part to it, a third part, you know, like you sort of this hubris of youth where you think, well, you know, at 20, you feel invincible, but you also don't think that what's this going to look like when you're 65? What's this going to look like at 80? What's this going to look like at 40? What's this going to look like at 32? Like there's a blindness to the fact that at some point you're in an empty apartment and you realize, all right, one wrong move, nobody finds me. That's its own kind of loneliness. And then, you know, you have a health scare or something, you end up in the hospital and you think, well, I mean, I would think that that's an extremely lonely position to have something serious and the only people around you are those that are paid to be around you. So friendships are really important to maintain, and the examples of that loneliness are all around you. And focus on them not to despair. Focus on them to just remind yourself of what you're actually doing it for. You know, when you show up to something that you didn't want to show up to, when somebody invites you over for dinner and you know that it's not just about dinner, to just read between the lines and just take the drive. And I think communication, words, speech, there's something about my line and lines of work where I'm a little exhausted about winning. I'm getting really tired of winning because, you know, it's always, a lot of the correspondence is just, you know, dear jackass, if you can breathe while reading this, please refer to my earlier statement pursuant to April 3rd in the email therein attached. See this precedent, this contract, this. It's just this constant just reminding people of their incompetence and having to be hyper vigilant of the competitive nature of everything and how everyone's trying to get something for nothing. And it's just, it becomes, you know, you can write the greatest exegesis and the greatest analysis of the world, but if it's not connecting with somebody, if it's not reaching somebody, if it's not advancing the growth of the collective consciousness, it's very much like building a massive house in the middle of the tundra. And there you are as the sun goes down, sitting on a chair on the porch, and all you get to do is watch the snowdrift on it, right? Like that's all that it is if it's not connecting with people. And so when I think in conversations, I mean, what is it in the conversations with friends that is not just the complete antidote to that? It's this mode of communication that you need to engage in because it's building something. And it's also the way in which you would want to talk to yourself internally. There's that advice about how you have to treat yourself as though you're someone who's in charge of you. I mean, that's how you practice those muscles, is by being outside of another person, but having empathy for them. And then developing this way to treat somebody with empathy that you can actually apply to yourself. It's oddly selfish, but in a very magnanimous way. I mean, I suppose there's another paradox of life. And, I think about, there's something about movies and art where I would never want to explain it to you. I would never want to speak on behalf of the artist. So when I speak about these things, understand that it's just my honest read of what I'm feeling from it. And so I'm thinking about Good Will Hunting, 1997. Robin Williams, Sean, Matt Damon, Will. And I mean, it's so infused within the culture. Who has to explain it? It's like explaining Snow White to you. But you've got the context of it, I suppose, is that you've got the genius janitor. He was put into the foster system. He's showing all these signs of actually being a savant by solving an equation on the board, but he's got a troubled past. Talks to Sean, played by Robin Williams. And it's his evolution into being a whole person instead of sort of a kind of fractured, erratic. And the way that I read it is, so there's two scenes. The first scene is he's in the office. I think it's the first meeting with Sean, Robin Williams, and he analyzes this painting, and he eventually says, that's you in the painting. You're trying to communicate to us that, your wife was sleeping with somebody else and the weight of the world is crushing on you. Sean grabs Will by the neck and basically essentially communicates to him that, like, you're getting too close. Don't speak like this. And the second scene is Sean by the river with Will, and he's explaining to him that essentially you can analyze everything possible in the world, and you can have the most intelligent read of everything, but there is something about the experience. So you can tell me everything about Michelangelo, but you can't tell me what the Sistine Chapel smells like. And maybe it seems a bit sentimental, and I mean, Hollywood does, but I suppose not Hollywood, the medium of movies does demand a certain kind of compression. And I've heard it criticized before that, like, real life is not like this, where there's epiphanies and you cry it out and then you're fixed and changed. Like there's a lot of license in the sense of compressing a long, arduous process into an archetype. And I suppose movies actually do. I've been harsh on them in the past in some ways. But, I mean, growing up, I mean, I do remember this odd moment where, I've always really liked movies. And my family was, I mean, my mom had all the Roger Ebert books. And so I've been watching The Four Stars since I was a little kid. And if you're ever wondering, why, what causes me to end up like this, I mean, it's probably because I saw Walkabout when I was 14 years old, and then Reservoir Dogs the next day. So there's a lot in there, I'll say. But there was this moment, I think, when I was around 17 or 18, where it's just, all these kind of errant, high-energy ADHD kids. And then, for whatever reason, I forget the scenario, we just all sat down and watched Apocalypse Now, the director's cut, and just sat through the whole thing in silence. Colonel Kurtz reading The Hollow Men, all that stuff. It's almost like a miracle in some way, but there was something that enraptured all of us. But so in these scenes, I'm just thinking, well, remembering the context of the movie. So, I mean, Will is sort of a victim of the foster system. So he's abused, he's mistrustful, he doesn't really trust any authority. He doesn't trust any care. He doesn't trust any love, so to speak. I mean, I think one of the big plot points in the movie is him finding his way into falling in love, right? So when I'm thinking about that first scene, well, that's all of us sort of testing care and testing people and friends, that they won't betray us in the way that we feel the world has, or the way that we've been betrayed in the past. And it's kind of like this pushing for stability, because I've spoken in the past about people testing you. I mean, men kind of do this with banter, where they're just making jokes about one another and pushing each other's boundaries. And that actually has a very certain purpose to it, is to make sure that your psyche is stable enough that you can handle criticism and you can handle being razzed and still maintain your stability. And, when you talk about kids and bullying, I mean, everyone is romantic about everyone experimenting in love, but we forget that we experiment in hate too. And it goes overboard, and it can scar you for sure. And that's my honest read when I watch that scene. It's just he's testing him. And I mean, Robin Williams lashing out. I mean, all I can say is that I've been grabbed by the throat before, and it was never for a crime so heinous as to suggest somebody's wife was sleeping with somebody else. I mean, when I think about my read in that situation, like, what would I do in the place of Sean? And I would think, well, somebody in a vulnerable position is like, even though it's saying the most horrible things to you, they're still reaching out to you. They're still trying to connect with you. And so I think that as much as you possibly can, you're supposed to have reverence for that. And, you would hope you would. And just recognize it for what it is. Here is a person that is pushing your limits because they don't feel safe. They don't trust you. They're not entirely certain that they can have that unfiltered conversation wherein all the good things happen, because, the conversations they had prior were guarded. And then I think too, like, Will being this savant, it almost seems like a reference to the loneliness of an individual's experience. Now here it's in an extreme where, say that he's got an IQ of like 180 or something. I mean, who really understands him as deeply as he understands the world? I mean, I had this, we sort of forget that not all mentors are positive. So I knew this guy, and he was what I would say is a high functioning drug addict. So he worked in IT, and he was very well paid, and he was affable and charming, and just, he was in a very unfortunate position. It was because he was so functional and so charming and so erudite that he never really hit rock bottom, and nor could anyone actually tell that he was in a bad place. So here he is, getting amphetamines, from God knows where. It's carrying his life around, and eventually there's a collapse, and he turns things around, and it was an arduous process for him. But then in the middle of it, I mean, I would ask him advice, because I mean, I was taken into this web of him being a functional, charming fella. Surely he knows the secret to life. But what he told me was, he just reminds himself that every day he wakes up and there's an open window and he can hear the birds singing and there's sunlight coming through. And it's that line, it's that line from Echoes, a million bright ambassadors of morning. so to speak, with sunlight, and to just remember that you've got another day each time. And in my worst moments, I would just think, well, great, there's birds and there's sunlight, so I can see everything that holds me back, and I can hear the birds mocking me every day. And it's an odd matter of perspective, but I remember it for so many years, because maybe it's just another one of those open loops where I haven't gotten the full conclusion to it. There's supposed to be a second half to this presence of morning. There's supposed to be, there's another missing piece, something more to know. And then, moving on to the second scene, the way that it ends is Sean telling Will, essentially, you analyzed the painting, you analyzed my life, and you tore it apart. And I mean, it's to sort of break the fourth wall on that too. That was written by Affleck and Damon when they were college age, I think like 22 to 24. And so in one way it's kind of bizarre in the sense that I don't know how much of this is conscious. Like they could be writing about what they see in the world without knowing what they see in the world. I don't know if they're necessarily aware of the traumatic response or what kind of behavior they're actually referencing, or is Sean their experience with chaotic adults when they were growing up. It's one of those things where it is kind of like this tap into the collective unconscious. Art is tapping into your subconscious, and it's tapping into the collective unconscious. And that's why, I mean, I consider art so important, and why I have this penchant for poetry, because there's all this unintentional residue of the person and the world, and who knows, even the divine, that finds its way into art. And the way that it is ambiguous, the way that it is a matter of your interpretation. And I mean, I suppose there is a way in which you can, if you're looking for something, you can find it. And that is one of the other great paradoxes of life, where you see what you want to see, but at the same time, you can be moved, and you can find a conclusion to something that you weren't looking for. I suppose that's the experience of awe. And the way that I think about it changes every time. What you see in yourself, like maybe I'm meant to be Will, maybe I'm meant to be Sean, maybe I'm neither because I'm not in a conversation. And in thinking about conversation and just this idea about words as warfare and just how hollow it is and like what the actual point of speech is, I think I heard it said once, someone was giving this lament about a conflict they had with somebody. And in there, they expressed this desire that maybe I can just say more. Maybe I can just give more context, more explanation, more will do it. And there's this idea of trying to win a conversation like a debate, but there's no real winner in those kind of things. And maybe this idea and this temptation to over-explain and to over-elucidate, maybe that is in and of itself, maybe not a warfare, but just an exercise in wishful thinking, or maybe it is a rigid architecture, or a idea that you want to see manifest in the world, and it kind of masquerades as a genuine open feeling. And so when I think about all of these times in which I have engaged in conversation that is just trying to explain more and more and more and more, and trying to work my way through that. I mean, I've said before, kind of consciousness is kind of cruelty, in the sense that you're given the world and you're given rational faculties to engage within it. And then there's this again, a paradox where you have to just open the aperture all the way to experience without architecture. And so when I think of these conversations where I'm just trying to explain more and more and more, I think maybe the regret that I would have, and I would think about those conversations, is just all the times that I just didn't stop and say, I understood and I'm sorry.